Hello, this is Jim McKeeth, and welcome to this developer skill sprint for February 9th, 2016. This is the Tuesday Delphi skill sprint on using effects, animations, and transitions on FireMonkey components. This skill sprint works across all platforms and all languages, so if you're watching this, you can take advantage of what I'm showing you right away. So here's a quick agenda we're going to cover. We actually have quite a bit we're going to talk about, and I think it's quite interesting and I believe also quite useful. But before I get into all the technical details, let's talk about a little about why you would want to do this. What we're going to look at is ways you can give your user interface more life, to make it more interactive and to make it more intuitive to your users. So basically the idea is, sure, you can make it crazy, fancy, and exciting, but what we want to do is we want to make the user interface engaging and make it apparent to the users through animation and effects for how the user interface works. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details about how to do that. If you check out Google's material design documentation, that has some good information on there about how to use animation and such to show the affordances that the user interface provides. So lots of cool stuff, great information if you want to get into good UI design, but we're going to show you the technical aspect of how you can do that so that you can take advantage of the user interface design guidelines that you're aware of. So FireMonkey Basics, this is just the basics of it, but anything can be nested. You can put an image inside of a button and then you have a image button. So everything can be nested. Also in FireMonkey, most numeric properties are single or floating point numbers and they're animatable. Okay, so that means the position, which is an XY coordinate, is floating point numbers. So it's not just 1, 2, 3. It can be 1, 1.1, 1.2, etc. And it's animatable. So you can use animations in order to change that. We'll talk about those in a second. Also, if you want to get the image behind a layout, so let's say you've put buttons and controls on a layout and you want to get a screenshot of that, you just call the make screenshot method, and that gives you back a bitmap of what it currently looks like, which we'll take advantage of. So that can be really useful. So animations, mentioned this previously, but animations give you the ability to modify the value of property over time, which is referred to as duration. These are really flexible. There's lots of different animations you can use. Most of the time I find myself using the float animation, which is what you use to change a floating point value. But some of the other animations that are available there can change, for example, rectangles, colors, the color key animation, float key animation, and T-path animation change through a list of values, where the other ones change from a start point to an end point. The one exception to that is the bitmap list animation, and that one is like for a film strip, really, almost, where you give it a series of bitmaps and it just animates through those bitmaps. So it's like a film strip. And then the other ones, like I said, they change from a start value to an end value. You have events of on process and on finish. So on process occurs while it's processing, and then on finish occurs when it finishes. Now, you specify a duration and then you start it and it runs, and it uses threading. And because of the nuances of the system architecture, if you have two animations, and let's say you're moving controls around on the screen, they won't necessarily stay synchronized. Okay, and that's because the different threads get priority at different times and stuff like that, and it could introduce slight discrepancies in there. So if you do need to have two controls remain synchronized in the animation, you want to use a single animation control, and then on the on process, set the values that you want to animate on both of those. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. If you don't want to use the animate components, which is what I'll show you, you can also use the animate methods, which I'll show you an example of that as well. Anyway, this is a really powerful way to change the value of something over time. And it does a really smooth job. Everything's really smooth, and you don't have to write hardly any code to do it at all. Most of it you can do with no code. Occasionally you'll do a little bit of code. So very, very powerful way to, like I said, change the value of something over time and smoothly as well. Now, one thing when you get into animation, you're going to talk about interpolation, which is a really I guess you could say it's a strange sounding word. Basically what it means is it determines how the rate of the value changes over time. So linear is the default, and that's just where it constantly changes. So it starts at 0, and then 1 second later it's a 1, 1 second later it's a 2, 1 second later it's a 3, 1 second later it's a 4. That's a very slow linear interpolation. But some of the other interpolations, like a quadratic, start out slow and then get faster over time. Bounce, for example, actually it's like a ball bouncing. And so you can use, if you use bounce on a control, the control will look like a ball. It'll go up and down, up and down, up and down, or side to side, side to side. So that's kind of an interesting one, and it'll continue to get more or less as it goes. One note, though, is you also have animation type, and this controls how the interpolation is applied. So sometimes in other animation systems I've seen, it talks about easing in versus easing out, or easing both, and that's what the animation type does. So if you use quadratic, so quadratic starts out slow and then gets faster, and then use in out, then it will start out slow, get faster, and then slow back down again. So we'll have the nice gradual change. Some of the other ones, like for example, quadratic or cubic or quintic are a more extreme version of quadratic. And so they'll start out slow and then get really, really fast and then get really slow again. If you take out that link there that you see at the top, that explains all the interpolation types in more detail. Okay, so effects. If there's over 40 GPU powered effects, and that's not including the transition effects, which we'll talk about later, that are available to you. They're built using shader filters. This means they take advantage of the GPUs. They use the shader language of the GPU to really be very powerful and very fast. The effects have optional triggers that you can use so that they can be applied automatically. So that means you can put an effect on a control and then have a trigger for, like, when the mouse is over the control or when the checkbox is checked or whatever, to enable that effect. And so then you can add a glow effect to a control very easily. And it can be very flexible. You can do whatever you want to with it. So very cool. You can apply it to both images and controls, which is kind of interesting. So some of the examples we originally shipped showed it applying to images, but today I'm going to show you how to apply it to controls as well. So transition effects are specific types of effects that change the parent image or control into the target image. Okay, so you have a progress property that represents the percentage, how much has been applied over time. And then you can animate that progress property in order to animate the transition effect. So to have the animation effect, like for example, to fade in and out between things, you can use animation for that. Now, the transition effects transition either a control or an image into an image. Okay, it always takes an image as the target. So if you're wanting to transition from one layout to a different layout, what you would do is use make screenshot of the target layout in order to get a bitmap back to set as the target of the transition, which I'll show you in the demonstration. So now let's do some demonstrations. The first sample I'm showing you here is the shader filter sample. This is when we ship with Tin Seattle. And what it does is it shows you the different effects on this image here. So for example, you're going to come in here and let's say, let's do a Gaussian blur and adjust the level here to completely blurred out to just slightly blurred out. A couple interesting ones here. There's color adjust where you can crank the contrast up here. For example, let's see the composite one. This is blending with another image. That's not very interesting. Okay, the distortion ones here. These are kind of interesting. This one does is it has a point in the middle, and you can change the amount of distortion that happens here on it. But This is really, really smooth. It's probably not going to come through very smooth in the video recording and the animation, but it's very smooth. The pinch one here, this is kind of a cool looking one. It kind of looks like a ball or a bubble floating along or something like that. And the smooth magnify, this is a pretty slick one here, where it's just a magnification. And all these can be adjusted. You don't want to make your outer radius smaller than your inner radius, or you're going to get this really stark one here. But as long as your outer radius is less than your inner, or outer radius is greater than inner radius, you can crank that zoom level up really high. Let's see. Oh, transitions. So this shows all the different transitions you can do. So for example, like the dissolve transition, and I can actually animate these. But there's one here that's really, really cool. The swipe transition. Now this one doesn't have a play on it, but you can grab, it's like a page curl. See that? So cool. And you can actually use this guy here to change the direction of the curl. Anyway. Very cool that you can do that here, and it's very easy to use. There's a lot more in here that'd be fun to show off. I can't remember where all of them are at. But you can take a look at these and experiment with the different styles and see how they work and what the controls do and stuff like that in order to figure out which effects you want to apply in your own applications. So let's take a look at this animation sample here. This is one I wrote. Now, what I have is I have animations on these controls here. So this one animates when I mouse over it. When I mouse off, it scales back down. So that just does just the scale on it. This one scrolls horizontally. Now, I'm not sure if you could notice this or not through the webinar, but it starts out slow and then speeds up and then slows back down again. Okay, and so I'll show you how that's done on the properties of that. But this one here is linear. So see how it's the same speed all the way. Okay, so that's an important thing here. And this one here showing the color transition. So if I select a color here and then click this rectangle, that rectangle is going to animate to that color over 2 seconds. I set it to 2 seconds because I thought that would be enough time that you could see it with the frame rate of the webinar. Okay, and now this button here, I'm playing with the path animations on this one. So this is a path control here, and I've gone out to this monkey SVG and got the path information from that. And I'll show you what that looks like and put it in here for this path control. And so it just renders, it draws it out for us. But then the cool thing is this rectangle has a path animation on it. So when I click it, it activates it. And you notice the upper left-hand corner of that rectangle is now following that path. I set it to a 10-second duration for this, so it's going to draw, maybe it's 30 seconds. Anyway, probably 30 seconds. So now it's drawing this monkey for us following those paths. So very cool. If you want to generate some complex paths like this, you can use the utility Inkscape. It's very good for that sort of thing. It's freely available. Or you can generate this information manually. So I'll show you what this looks like in code here. All right, so this is the first unit here, the first form. Now there's very, very little code here. Most all this is done through the components. So the checkbox 1 is the horizontally scroll. And so it has a float animation here. And so if you come in here and find the position and go to the X and hit the drop down here and say create new float animation, it will create a float animation attaching it to the X position. All right. The other option is you can come over to the tool palette, get a float animation, drop it on the form, and then drop it onto the checkbox. You just drag and drop it here in the structure panel. So this is the float animation, and it's attached to its parent. So the parent is what it affects, and the property it's going to change is position.x. So it's important you spell this correctly if you're typing this in manually, or you can actually use the drop-down list here and select it from there. So these are the common ones. You can animate any float with this. All right. Now, remember, it start out slow and went fast, it's doing quintic. So quintic is it's based on, let's see, quadratic. Quintic is the fastest quadratic, so it's the most accelerated quadratic. If you take a look at the documentation, you can see how that's explained. And I'm using animation type in out. Now, if it was just in, then it would start out slow and get faster and faster and faster, and then finally just stop abruptly. If it was out, it would start out fast and get slower and slower and slower, and then come into a slow stop. But I'm doing in out, which means it starts slow, gets fast, and then slows back down again. Okay, so probably quadratic in out is probably, unless either linear or quadratic in out, I'm going to guess is probably the most common scenario you're going to want to use, because then it's going to have either the constant behavior with linear, or quadratic is kind of the more organic behavior, if you will. It's like it has inertia, it has mass, so it takes a while to get it going, and then once it gets going, it wants to keep going, and then it takes a while to stop. Here's the duration. The default duration is 0.2 seconds, so 0.2 of a second. I set it to 2 seconds. Again, hopefully to make it more visible for the video recording. And then trigger, this is where you specify the automatic trigger. So is checked. As soon as that checkbox is checked, then it triggers this animation. And then if the checkbox is unchecked, it triggers the inverse. And so the inverse goes from stop value to start value. One component property here, start from current. If you want this animation to start from wherever it currently is at and then complete, you can do that. Although if you use start from current, then you can't do the inverse, because then it gets the current is where it's at. So for example, if I animate this to position X 500 and have start from current selected and say do inverse, it says, okay, I'll animate it from 500 to 500 because it's at 500 and I'm going from 500. And so, yeah, that doesn't work. So just keep that in mind. Something else here, auto reverse means when it gets to the end, it will reverse to go back. And then loop means just keep going forever. So if you have loop without auto reverse, it'll run from start to stop, start to stop, start to stop. If you have loop with auto reverse, you're on start to stop, stop to start, stop to start, stop. You got it. You figured it out. That was a tongue twister. Events. We have an event here on finish. So if you want to have something happen when the animation finishes, you put it on the on finish event, and then on process is when it's occurring. So remember, if you want to have two controls that stay synchronized, then you want to use on process to set the current value of both those controls to match. All right. The scale button here, it has two animations on it because scale has an X and a Y component to it. So scale X and scale Y. It's exactly the same, except one scales X, one scales Y. So in theory, these could be off, but because it's just scaling just the one time, it's going to be unnoticeable. But if you had something that was like looping, that's when you'd notice things getting off if you had two different animations going. And then this one here, this is using, and it's on the on-click event here. This is using the animate color. So all FireMonkey controls have a bunch of these animate procedures that you can call. And if you want to do animations. So if you don't want to drop the component on the form, you can use animate color and perform or animate float delay, animate float wait, animate int, color, etc. So you can animate all of these things without dropping the components in the form. You just set the properties. So again, we're tapping what we're wanting to animate. So it's the fill.color. Make sure you spell it correctly. We're getting the color we want to use, the duration, and we're using the animation time in out. And I set it to bounce. Bounce is kind of weird because it's like a ball. Boom, 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 boom. So that was kind of weird. I'm going to go back to, I'll just go to linear. Linear is that I smooth constant change. So there we go. That's animations. Very powerful. If you're wanting to move things around, change things, don't write a loop to do it. Use an animation. Okay. If you're wanting to move a control on the form, use an animation. It's the way to go. It's going to be much smoother and much less code. Okay, so let's take a look at effects. So I've got a couple effects on here. First of all, I got the magnification turned on. There we go, magnification turned on. So this is using the smooth magnify, and it's following my mouse cursor around. So as my mouse cursor moves, it's magnifying. Now notice this is magnifying the whole form. So even I have checkboxes here and switches and this image, and all of it's being magnified here with the smooth magnify. But notice this checkbox here is not being magnified. I'll show you how I did that here in a second. All right, so let's turn off the magnification. Now the switch has a glow on it. This is really cool. It understands the switch, how the switch is laid out, so it glows all the way around it here. See that? It's just, I really love the way that behaves. And so here we go. It glows in both positions. It knows the different behaviors it has. Okay. And then here's the checkbox. The checkbox has a shadow on it, a drop shadow on it. Again, see the drop shadow understands the font in here. And then when I check it, I thought I had a different thing on the check. I guess I don't. I took that off. Anyway, there you go. That's what I want to show you there. So let's show you the code for that. The effects sample. Oh, I didn't show you. Aha. Sorry. Layout back here. I didn't show you the animation for the FireMonkey, the paths. So the tPath has a data property. And you're going to go to that URL for the SVG, open it up, and it's going to have some XML looking stuff in there, and it's going to have a property, I think it's like D, and you're going to see this data like this here. And you can just copy all that data and paste it into here. Okay, so you don't want nothing looks like XML. And then as soon as you click on the OK button, if you just hold it for a second, you'll get the preview show up. And then you do the exact same thing here on this guy. You come in here and you find the property. Oh, let's see right here on the path animation. It has a path property. And again, you set it in here. So the exact same data. That's it. That's all there was to it. I told it to loop and changed the duration to 30 seconds. And then the code on the click event handler just starts the animation. Okay. All right. Sorry about going out of order here. Okay. Let's go back to the effects here. So on my form, I have, first of all, if you want to have the magnify effect or an effect applied to a form, you have to put a layout down. Okay. So see layout 1 here. Everything else is on layout 1. All right. And then the smooth magnify effect is applied to layout 1. Okay. Now, if you want to catch the mouse move events, then what you do is you put a layout over that. And so layout 2 is also on the form. It's parented by the form and it's on top of it. But I set it to visible false, and turn on hit test. And so what that does is that gives me all the mouse move events. Okay. If you try and do the mouse move event on layout 1, then you don't get the mouse move events when it goes over another control. Okay. So if I had the mouse move event on layout 1, I wouldn't get move events when I was over the checkbox, the switch, or the image here. Okay. So that's how I do that. And then I just actually use live bindings here because they're so cool and so easy to bind. Checkbox 1 is checked to the visibility of layout 2 and enabling the smooth magnify effect. Now, your effects don't usually show up in live bindings here. So I'll show you how to do this real quick. Let's do the shadow effect. If I want to bind this one, I just right click on it, say bind visually. Boom, there it is. It shows up in live bindings. Click the ellipses, come down here to enable, and now I could live bind the shadow effect. Very cool. I love live bindings. Okay. That's all it is for those. And then here we go. The checkbox itself, I have a shadow effect on it. And then the switch, okay, it has both a shadow effect and a glow effect. But then the glow effect, so this is one that has 2 on it, was the switch, not the checkbox. The glow effect is triggered when mouse is over it. So that way it lights up, makes it hot when you go over it. I love that, so that it makes it very intuitive. Now that works on a mouse interface, Windows and Mac, but the is mouse over doesn't make sense on Android or iOS because it's a touch interface. Although Android, you can't have a mouse with it. Anyway, so then the shadow effect is always on. So I could put an effect on the checkbox on checked, but that's the way it's set up for right now. Okay, so now let's show you the transitions here. What I want to do is I wanted to take a tab control and then have different transitions of switching between tabs. I'm hiding the tabs and I'm doing the transition manually through the switch button here. So let's show you this in action. So I tap the switch button. Now I have this animated, this progress bar, so you can watch this animation applies with the progress bar still there. It's so cool. Watch this. There we go. So it's a 2-second transition. And then notice the track bar animates as well as it's still going. So cool. And yeah, so there's the radio buttons. Switch back. Okay, so there's lots of different things you can do this. We do have the actions with the swipe, the animation built into it, but hey, there's more animation possibilities than just swipe. So here's how I did it this way. So what's going on here is in the switch, I have a transition effect. So I'll show you here. It is on tab item 1. Now, each tab item has a layout inside of it and all the controls in the layout. And that's so that you can apply, because the transition won't apply to the tab item. You have to apply it to the layout itself. Okay? So what I'm doing here is the tab effect, I disable it just in case it was already enabled. And I reseed it, so it has a random seed. This tab effect I'm using, which is the transition, it's rotated crumple transition effect. A lot of the transition effects have a random seed if they have random behavior to them. If they don't, then you wouldn't use that random seed. Then here, I changed the parent of the transition effect. So the transition effect has a parent, and that's what it animates. All right. And then I enable it, and then I start the float animation. So the float animation is attached to the transition effect's progress property. It goes from 0 to 100. So 0% to 100% over 2 seconds. That's it. You could mess with the interpolation, the animation type of stuff like that if you wanted to, but in this case, I'm not. Then on the float animations progress event here, I set the transition effects target to, and I look at what my active tab is. So if I'm on tab 1, then I'll get tab 2's layout and do make screenshot. And so what this does is it gets a bitmap representation of everything that's on tab 2 and sets that as the target of the transition effect. And the reason I'm doing that here on the on progress or on the on process is so that it updates as that animation changes. So remember I had that progress bar that was changing. If I didn't do this, if I just assigned this once at the beginning of the animation, then it would freeze that animation, the changing data on the target control. So that would be simpler, but hey, we're not about simple, we're about doing it the cool way, right? So doing it here, it updates it continually as it's going along. Okay. And then when it's done, has another event when it's done on finish that it disables the transition effect. So we get rid of it, we turn it off altogether because you don't really need it at that point because we're done. And at this point, we're going to change tabs. So we're going to say, okay, if we're on tab 1, we're going to go to tab 2. And in this case, I'm only ever switching between 2 tabs. If you were going to have multiple tabs or some other way you could change states, you would need something to keep track of the state that you're going from and going to. But you can figure that out. That's pretty easy. One note here. On the form create, I switch tabs. So I start on tab 1 and I switch to tab 2 and then switch back again. If you don't do this, then the make screenshot doesn't get an accurate representation of the target. It's the size gets off. And that's just because it hasn't actually created it yet, because it hasn't actually existed. So that's an optimization in FireMonkey, that if the tab control doesn't exist yet, it hasn't actually created the visuals representation of the controls correctly. So I'm not sure if it's a bug or not, but that's just the behavior that's there. So just do this real quick. It's imperceivable to the user. It just goes through and constructs all those controls and gets the size correctly when you do this. Okay, so that was the transition sample. You can do this. There's tons of transitions here. Oh, let's see. I got to go to design time. So here's all the transition effects. You could use all these. The swipe transition effect is the one that I showed you in the shader filters that doesn't have a progress, but the rest of them have a progress, and you can use any of those with this. So very cool. The blood transition effect. Sounds a little gruesome, but the blood transition effect's more of a melting. That would be a better description for it. It kind of flows down the screen. For more information, you can check out the links here. Some of these I mentioned earlier. Also, there's the fantastic Code Rage session from, I think it was Code Rage 8 by Robert Love, which is the VCL Developer's Guide to FireMonkey. And it goes through a lot of the nuances of FireMonkey to really get you more familiar with how FireMonkey works and some of the different ways of thinking with FireMonkey. And it comes from the idea that you have a background in VCL development. The shader filter sample we ship, it's available right there, and which I showed you that, and it shows applying all of the different effects to the image there. But if you want to download the example code I have, you can check that out there at the blog notes link, which is embt.co/sprint-effects. Give me a brief moment to tell you about this limited time special offer. All 10 Seattle registered users get the bonus pack, which includes the new Object Pascal Handbook by Marco Cantu. This essential language reference is a modern language guide that includes new features of the language and the core runtime library, a must-have for any Delphi developer. Also get the Binder Converter Basic. It handles the heavy lifting when converting existing VCL applications into FireMonkey applications, so you can start taking advantage of multi-device development right away. And the Premium Style Pack includes premium styles for VCL and FireMonkey to make your application look great on every platform. For more information on these special offers, or to find out what the current offers are, please visit www.embarcadero.com/radoffer. And one more special offer we have only for the month of February is if you buy one tool, you get another tool for free. And it's a tool of equal or lesser price. The website says value, but sometimes you feel like you're getting better value on the free tool. It feels like sometimes, at least for me. So if you buy Rad Studio, Delphi, or C++ Builder 10 Seattle, either new user or upgrade, Professional Enterprise Ultimate Architect, you can get any of those tools you see there. For example, Konopka Signature VCL controls, CodeSite Studio 5, Interbase, or a number of the other database tools. Full details and instructions are available at the RAD offer page you see down there at the bottom. So check that out. If you don't have 10 Seattle yet, this is a great time to upgrade to 10 Seattle and take advantage of the special offer. Next time, we have effective if-def usage for cross-platform development and conditional compilation. The Tuesday skill sprint for Delphi is on the 16th of February, and the C++ skill sprint is on Thursday, which is the 18th of February. Check out the full schedule there, and always verify your time and dates are correct, because we base it on San Francisco. Sometimes daylight savings time changes in unexpected ways, so make sure you show up at the right time. And now it's time for Q&A.
Okay, David I here, along with Jim McKeeth.
Hello, everybody.
Excellent session.
Thank you. It's really impressive. There's so much in there, and there's so many other stuff I could have got into. There was a question here about if we could do like a page turn effect with the swipe and have text in the front and the back. And actually, it looks like you can do that. But so I'll put together a sample on that as well. So let's see, questions here. Question is it right that animations are running in the main thread and they're not running in their own thread? So it's interesting that the answer is both. The animations are, the calculations and the timing take place in a separate thread. And that's why I mentioned, like, if you have two objects you're moving around the screen over a long period of time, like looping, that you want to do it from the same animation. Otherwise, they can get out of sync, and that's because the timing takes place in a separate thread.
And the
Okay,
GPU
so
do it, right? So it's not burdening the CPU in that way, right?
right, exactly. So the GPU is doing the transitions and the effects calculations. That's being passed back to the app in a separate thread. That separate thread then does the timing, figures out when it needs to splice that update in, and then does it. Yeah. So yeah, it's being done in a separate thread and separate processor. But then it all is being updated in the main thread because that's the way the user interface works. So the swipe animation, I mentioned this a second ago here, it can have a image on both the front and the back. So there's the swipe animation has a parent, which is what you're going to be animated from, has a target, which is what it's being animated to, target property, and then it has a back property, which is the image that will appear on the back of the page that is being turned.
So if you wanted like text pages versus a photo album, for example, you create a bitmap of the text page and put that on the front and back for two different pages, right?
Right, correct. And if you wanted to render it as text and then convert it to a bitmap, you should use make screenshot and you have a bitmap ready. And you probably noticed the memory leak in there. All I did was when I call the make screenshot, I would copy that to the target screenshot and then free it when I was done. That's all I had to do to fix that. It's like, oops, I forgot I have to do memory management on the desktop. Can transitions be applied to the whole form, i.e. the whole window, or only to controls inside the form? So the way, at least I understand it, Jeff, is that you can apply the transition to a layout that fills the entire form, but you can't apply them to the form themselves. I'm not sure why that is. Wait. Yeah, I think you had to do it layout. I'm not sure. I put a layout down when I was doing that, and then put all the controls on the layout, and then apply the transition to that layout. And that would and apply the transition that way. So you can apply it to the whole form, but you have to do it from within a layout. Oh, maybe you're asking if they can only be applied to controls. So yeah, I don't know if you can apply it to like the Chrome around the page. So
you have to think, FireMonkey, that a form is in a sense a container. It's different than a VCL form, which is a Windows window, right? That a FireMonkey form is a sort of composite of a bunch of bitmap rendered controls or containers. That's the way I try to think about it. I mean, there is a Windows handle or an OpenGL context somewhere under the covers. But the best way is to go into the 10 Seattle ID, create a FireMonkey app, and see where you can apply animations, effects, and so on.
Right. Yeah. So just experiment with it, and it's quite easy to do to see how it works. Is it okay to combine animations and transitions? Yes, and that's what I was showing there with the in the sample I showed. It was an animated transition, and also the sample we ship shows animated transitions as well. Ken's asking if I used a tool to detect the memory leak. Actually, as I was rendering the video, I looked at that and said, that looks like a memory leak. And so I ran the program with Task Manager open, and sure enough, the memory just goes and goes up as the animation ran. I was like, yep, that's a memory leak. And so I just went in there. Actually, I tried just freeing the target directly, and that one didn't work. So I had to do the assign and then free it after the assign, and that fixed it. So
there are other tools for memory leak detection. AQ Time, Smart Pair software for.
Exactly, yeah. AQ Time works great for that. And had I ran through that, AQ Time would have said, whoa, hold on there. Or I guess we have the, you could turn on that report in the memory manager as well to also tell you about memory leaks. Okay, that looks like the end for skill or questions here. And I do want to point out, if you didn't notice, you didn't catch it already, that yesterday was the Lunar New Year. Monday was the Lunar New Year, and this is the year of FireMonkey. It is, they rotate through animals and elements, and this year is the culmination of monkey and fire, the monkey animal and the fire element. So this is literally the year of the FireMonkey. So very exciting to be working with such a powerful framework during its year. And then the cool thing is the fire element actually means prosperity. So pretty cool. So go out there and do cool stuff with FireMonkey this year. This is the year to do it. Hopefully this is something everybody finds useful. I know a lot of times we tend to just focus on, putting the data where it needs to be and letting users edit it according to the right rules. But my hope is that by being able to take advantage of these transitions and animations and effects, that we can give the user interface more, make it more physical, more tactile, which they call it affordances in user experience. But the idea being that they can, the user can intuitively know how to interact with the user interface and make it more obvious to them. Why don't we have an inertia animation that can be attached to any control like the one in T scroll box? Good question. Put it in a feature request. Go to quality.embarcadero.com and put a feature request in to make the inertia animation available. So just make a very detailed feature request, and hopefully they'll see that and put it in there. I'm not aware of it if it is available somewhere else, so yeah, good suggestion. So question, if the magnify effect always centers on the mouse corner or if there's an offset property. So the way it works is you tell it where to center. So you could, what I'm doing is just taking the mouse cursor and saying mouse is at XY, center at XY. You could say center at X plus 10, Y plus 10, or plus 100, or whatever you want to do. So it's in no way attached to the mouse. So you could, if you wanted to, animate the movement of the magnification and have it move around the screen, and do it that way and have nothing to do with the mouse at all. So it's completely up to you. You can do it however you want to do it. Yes, a bunch of stuff. Some of this stuff I used before, but I dove into a lot more of it in preparing for the session, and it's just so powerful and so cool to use. Some of it wasn't intuitive, like interpolation. I kind of knew what that was, but I had to really read through it and understand exactly how interpolation works and stuff like that. So yeah, really cool stuff, very powerful, exciting to use. Why doesn't FireMonkey support GLSL on Windows? So on Windows, FireMonkey uses DirectX because, and I realize this is a religious battle whether or not you should use DirectX or OpenGL on Windows, but Microsoft says that recommends using DirectX, and DirectX has certain things available to it, so that's why it uses DirectX on Windows. And it would probably be easier to use OpenGL on all the platforms because it would be exactly the same, well, very similar code, but what they were told and what they looked into and what they found was that DirectX offered advantages, and so they actually implemented it supporting DirectX on Windows. So that's why it works with DirectX. You can use OpenGL. There's libraries out there to use OpenGL, and so that's an option to you. It's not like you're being blocked off from OpenGL, but it is open to you. Just FireMonkey is based on DirectX. So all the links, if you go to the embt.co/sprint-effects or the link in the chat window, the community Embarcadero link, all those links are available to you from there. So if you just go to that one link, then you get it's the one link to rule them all, if you will. It unlocks everything else for you, as well as all the text in the slides is also available there. So you can check that out. Okay, can we have the option to choose the library using the application like? So asking if you can globally change whether it's OpenGL or DirectX. No, because it would require implementing FireMonkey on Windows twice, and you'd have to switch it out. So FireMonkey is tied to DirectX on Windows, tied to OpenGL on other platforms. So I'm not sure why you want to have FireMonkey use OpenGL on Windows, but unfortunately it does use DirectX. And product management and R&D found that that was the way to do it on Windows. That's what Microsoft recommends as well. OpenGL is faster. Well, so you can access OpenGL directly. If you're wanting to do some really advanced OpenGL stuff, just go to OpenGL and go around FireMonkey altogether. You don't have to use FireMonkey if you do the OpenGL. That's one of the things I love about Delphi, is you have this great, powerful abstraction layer that is very productive, or you can go around it and access the underlying libraries directly. So Craig Chapman's working on an OpenGL library that runs across the multiple platforms as well. So, and he's just doing that because he wants to be able to write OpenGL code that can work across all platforms. Anyway, so yeah, I know I've always heard the debate OpenGL versus DirectX, which is faster on Windows, and it seems like it's like every other year. It's like, oh, now DirectX is faster. Oh wait, now OpenGL is faster. I don't know. They're both fast. They're both faster than anything I could put together, probably. So fast enough for what I'm trying to accomplish, at least. But yeah, if you need to use OpenGL, you can totally access it directly.
Great job, Jim. This is David I here.
Thank you. What would be the best way to get the bounce effect I see in iOS, where the control grows a bit bigger than the final size and then sinks back a bit? So look at the interpolations. I'm not sure which one of if one of those does that or not, but it might be. So if you go check out the interpolation link, then it will it explains all the different interpolations, and that would be an interpolation that does that. That has to go past the stop point and then back again. You could, if it do that, you could chain a couple animations as well.
And then float animation on the size of the control, right? I mean, you can
float animation on
width and height, yeah.
Or you could do it on the scale as well. There's a few different ways you can do it.
Yep.
The width and height, experiment with that, because scale will scale all of it, whereas width and height would change it. So it depends on what you're doing. So for example, like a checkbox, if you resize the checkbox stays the same size. It's just the text area of the checkbox that changes. Whereas scale will scale up the entire checkbox, including the text and the change the font size of the text and everything. So Marco's asking about performance on iOS. The tests I've done show that performance is the same on both. So let me know which animation you're doing, and I can try it out on my. I have an iPad. I don't have an iPad Air, but I have an iPad Mini. It should be similar hardware, I believe. So we can test it locally and see how that works if I notice any issues. If it is a lot slower, we can certainly file a bug report, but with everything I've tested shows it's very effective. Are all effects available on all platforms and devices, or are there some limits? So, for one thing I've seen, and I haven't tested every effect on every platform, but I assume somebody in QA has, that it works everywhere. The only difference is if you use the trigger event for the mouse over, it doesn't make sense on mobile devices. You can have a mouse attached to an Android device with a mouse pointer, but it's not very common. So if you just need to know that as far as platform differences. But otherwise, from a technical point of view, from the effects, it does work across all platforms. How would you chain animations? Use the on finish to trigger the next one? Exactly, yeah, Scott. So, and I've done this before. I actually built it was a random number picker for, so when we do live events, we'll sometimes have giveaways, and before we were just, doing some sort of crazy things like, we got this cool FireMonkey framework, and so this was the first time I really dove into animation. I'd looked at them briefly before, but never anything a purpose for it, and so I used the animations to have a random picker, and so what I did is I had three digits that would scroll down like a slot machine, they spinning around, and what I did is I had when it finished moving one control off the bottom, then it would. So what it had I had a layout, and then on the layout I had three labels that each had a separate number in it. And then what happened is when the label moved off the bottom, while the label was being animated moved down, another label that was off the top that was invisible because it was clipped would scroll into its place, and then as soon as that scrolled into its place, then the on finish event fired, and it moved the label that just scrolled off the bottom up to the top, just changed its location, and then restarted the animation again to move both of them down so that they stayed scrolling in sync. And now when I first did it, I had each label had its own animation on it, and that caused the animations to get out of sync over time. At first it started out fine, it looked great, but because of, as I mentioned, threading issues and stuff like that, sometimes they'll get slightly out of sync. So use the same animation across all the labels and it should work fine. Is there some way to animate relative to the current value, e.g. plus 50 rather than the absolute 500? I'm not sure I understand your question, Scott. You can set the animation, instead of having the animation start from 0 to 100, you could have the animation start from 50 to 150, and it would change the values that way. So you can set those animation ranges to anything you want. I showed the float animation, which animates from one value to the next value, but you could also use the key animation. I can't remember what it's called. Something float key animation or something like that. And what that does is it actually moves through a series of numbers. So there's a few different ways you can do that. So from current to current plus 50. So what I would do is
you can write code, right?
Exactly. I would say write
code.
So
the property values. Yeah, sorry.
Yep. So whatever it is you want to trigger that, just write an event handler and have the event handler say, where is it at right now? Okay, that's the start value. Add 50. That's the stop value, and then start the animation. You could do it with an animation component, or you could do it with the animation procedure, like I showed on the color picker. You could just call it that way. That would be the easiest way to do it, and get the value and start it. Only the downside to using animation procedures, animate float, is that it doesn't give you the event handler, so you don't have an event knowing when it finishes. If you don't need to know when it finishes, then yeah, go ahead and use those. That's great. Otherwise, you can just modify the values, the properties for that animation component.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to have a cool effects animation transition competition. Maybe that'll be a fun little exercise. We'll think about that. Fun. Yeah.
So I've been actually trying. Someone this morning asked if you use the swipe animation to do a page turn, and so I've been working on that. Actually, I have some memos down here, but I keep getting interrupted today with skill sprints and stuff like that. But I've got most of the way working. A couple little nuances I gotta figure out, but it should work. It looks like it's kind of cool. So if I get that done, I will post that on the skill sprint page, the embt.co/sprint-effects. I'll have the code up for that on there. We're in great shape. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Hopefully you find some useful uses for animations and effects and transitions in your FireMonkey application development.
Excellent. Take care, everyone. Thanks, Jim.
Yep. Thank you, David. Bye.